Good evening, fellow toppers. My name is Jonathan Ricks, and I am representing Group 3, and we're discussing tonight Chapter 7 of our required reading, and that was Working with the Virtual Student. All right. So to begin our discussion on working with virtual students, we have to first discuss the overall profile of our virtual students. Historically, the profile of our virtual students typically tended to be older individuals who were usually employed, usually full-time, typically are goal-orientated, and are, I'd like to say, place-bound, as in bound to their location, either with work or family, etc. Okay. We have to look at now that the current profile of our virtual students are much more diverse, right? Estimates from our text say that approximately 40% of our online learners now are under the age of 30 years old, and yet and still another 20% are even under 25 years old. And unlike historical profiles, these students tend to be more familiar with technology, and they also tend to have a more diverse life, work, as well as educational experiences. So the classical themes that we would use to deal with virtual students in the past may not apply in the future. Okay. And so next we need to get into some of the characteristics that successful online students tend to have. In our textbook reading, it was stated that students who are successful in online classes, according to the Illinois Online Network back in 2010, tended to be more open-minded in terms of sharing their life, work, and educational experiences. Specifically, sharing those experiences as a part of the learning process. Successful students tend to be able to communicate in writing and tend to be more self-motivated. Okay? In terms of their time devotion, they tend to spend or commit 4 to either 15 hours per week per course on their online learning. They also tend to have unlimited access to the computer as well as the internet, and are able to think about ideas thoroughly before making responses. Lastly, they feel that high quality learning can take place online as opposed to the traditional face-to-face classroom. So these are a couple of the characteristics that were observed for successful online students. Okay. So now the question becomes, with this new diverse group, what are going to be some of the adjustments that these students, as well as us as faculty, are going to need to make to distance learning? Okay. The traits that I just talked about on the previous slide, these online students are not born with some of those characteristics. So therefore, these traits need to be developed. So as faculty, our job is going to be to assist students in that adjustment. Okay. Number one, we're going to need to adjust to a role of more of a facilitator in our online classes instead of the traditional subject matter expert mold of traditional face-to-face classes. Okay. Also, students are going to have to adjust as well, right? Because even though, as I stated in the previous slides, that the current profile of students are more familiar with technology, they may not be familiar with using technology in terms of furthering their education. Okay? So students will need to be able to transition to become more active participants in the educational process. Okay? In the text, they talk about the term noisy learners. Specifically, that's defined as students who are engaging with other students in their generation of knowledge. Okay. So, in the process, us as faculty are going to have to assist students in this transition. And so, with that, we need to discuss some of the things that students are going to need to have to adjust to or be orientated regarding with respect to online learning. Okay? There are going to be several topics that us as faculty are going to need to address with our online learners such that they will be successful. So for example, number one, we're going to have to show them how to log into our courses, right? We're going to need to talk about how to navigate the course site, how to find assignments, how to upload assignments, right? We're going to need to talk about requirements for being successful online. These are things such as time requirements, right? And how to utilize proper time management to ensure that assignments are done in a timely manner. Okay? Also, within this orientation, us as faculty are going to need to stress some of the differences between face-to-face classes and online classes, such as the one I talked about in the previous slide with us as the instructors being more like facilitators. Okay? Students may or may not be used to that model in terms of how they obtain their knowledge, right? Classically, students are used to hearing the information from a subject matter expert, writing it down, regurgitating it for a test, right? In this new model of online learning, the student is going to have to now become more of an active participant, where us as faculty are going to just have to give them the information and let them lead the way in terms of their learning. Okay? So along with teaching students how to learn, we're going to have to show students how they're going to be evaluated and how these students should give proper feedback. And in that mode, that we also need to discuss appropriate student interactions and communications. Okay? And lastly, we need to tell students if they are in need of assistance, how they can obtain it. Okay? So speaking of how we reach our students, one other thing that we need to discuss is that students learn different ways, right? There are differing learning styles. Specifically in our text, we talk about 4 different types. We talk about convergers who seek concrete answers to problems. There are divergers who seek alternative solutions through brainstorming. There are assimilators who tend to build what we call theoretical models based on large amounts of information. And last but not least, there are accommodators who are more action orientated and tend to learn through trial and error. Okay? Us as faculty will need to accommodate each of these different types of learning styles when we create our courses by using varied approaches to build what we call a learning community for students to develop reflective, transformative learning skills. And what I mean by reflective, transformative learning skills, I mean learning that's based on group discussion and reflection to obtain knowledge. Okay? So, one of the last things the text tends to go into is some tips for us to help build this online community. Number one, we should be utilizing some of the best practices from face-to-face classroom discussions to promote online participation. For example, for myself, as a chemistry instructor, I know when I teach face-to-face classes, oftentimes I offer private student help or private student tutoring when needed or when requested by a student. So when I'm in an online platform, I would want to try to utilize some of those types of tools as well. Okay? I know, for example, also students miss class, right? On an online platform, it's much more difficult to monitor these types of things due to the more asynchronous style of teaching. But even still, we still need to make an effort to try to contact these students if they've missed a week or more, right? We need to also, because of the increased use of technology, we need to offer support for students that are having technical difficulties using this technology, right? This means things such as offering help yourself or getting them in touch with proper technical support when needed. Okay? Lastly, we need to intercede in situations between students if participation in the course is impacted due to conflict, right? And lastly, we also need to be present within our classes, right? We need to log in often to keep discussions moving. I think the text suggests at least 3 or more times a week. Right? And lastly, we need to ask broad questions that stimulate thinking and reflection. Okay? So to summarize, we need to not assume that students know how to learn online. We need to provide proper orientation for incoming students. We need to use varied teaching techniques for different learning styles that require both action and reflection. We need to encourage students to take charge of the learning process by providing assignments that allow for exploration, research, and collaborative work. We also need to pay attention to changes in student participation and address any issues if drops in participation is observed. All right? And last but not least, we need to be responsive to student needs and concerns, and students should know that the instructor is present.